Good evening, welcome to my channel. I have recovered now from COVID. So my voice still sounds a little bit odd, but pretty much fine now. I went for a short run yesterday and it seemed okay. But yeah, that's a pretty brutal dose of like a bad flu. That's what it felt like. Anyway, apart from my new sultry tones, I am largely recovered. But I have been using this wonderful computer system to edit the feature film version of Downhill From Here, my first book. So I've been very busy, so I haven't written any new stories, but what I would like to do today is read you the second chapter of Stutter, which is the one I'm sending out to agents. So here is Stutter, chapter 2, Gurdip Singh. He said he'd work out the rest of the month, and Gurdip was a man of his word, even if driving a taxi around congested inner London seemed an odd thing for a multi-millionaire to be doing. He'd even offered to cover Maxime's shift, driving the party circuit between Knightsbridge and the West End. The kind of young people Gurdip found himself ferrying about caused him physical pain sometimes, drooling rich kids, so-called entrepreneurs, bankrolled by mum and dad, wannabe it girls, hooray Henrys, social media influencers. Every generation threw up a froth of human detritus that felt easily and instantly entitled to the riches bestowed upon them for producing nothing at all of notable value. Gurdip, a devout Sikh, desperately tried not to loathe these people, who were almost always white, invariably spoke with clipped RP accents, and sometimes tipped with embarrassing, effortless generosity. He'd be glad to be free of them and the turmoil their presence in his cab caused in the pit of his stomach. The fact that he too would shortly become a man who had been handed millions of pounds for simply completing a form was an irony he'd so far managed to ignore. Gurdip scratched an itch under his turban and drew up on Jermyn Street, alongside a pale, swaying young man in a long woolen coat. The celebrity-favoured nightclub Tramp was a short way along the street, and a noisy crowd of young folk were crammed on the pavement outside, hailing frantically. At least this guy had the gumption to move away from the throng and catch Gurdip on the return from his last drop-off. As Gurdip's taxi cab came to a halt, a young woman, exceptionally drunk, tottered from behind a tree and toppled against her friend's side. The man laughed and threw an arm around her, muttering something in her ear. She made an effort to straighten herself up. Gurdip had the suspicion she'd been hiding there because no other driver wanted her in his vehicle. She was what Gurdip's fellow cabbies called a puker, a person so intoxicated they would almost certainly vomit once the vehicle got moving. Despite his misgivings, though, Gurdip couldn't help but think of his eldest daughter Layla at university in Exeter, studying politics. What if, God forbid, Layla was this inebriated after a night out with her university friends? He'd want somebody to ensure she got home safely. "Thanks, mate," was the curt greeting from the young man as he bundled his much younger companion into the back of Gurdip's cab. In the rearview mirror, Gurdip could see that the girl couldn't be older than 19 or 20, and her companion was closer to 30. Something didn't feel quite right here. The girl, blonde, half asleep, her breasts almost spilling from a top that was far too low cut, was hardly conscious, and something about her body language, curled up away from the man towards the side of the cab, suggested they weren't a couple. "Chelsea Harbour, please," the young man said. Did Gurdip detect a hint of a South African accent? "Okay, sir," Gurdip replied without turning. "Have you had a good evening?" The young man laughed. The sides of his head were shaven and there were strange wavy lines drawn into them. Gurdip tried not to judge him, thinking what a shame it was to mutilate what was probably a fine head of hair. "Too good for some, I reckon," the young man said, indicating his young friend, who, remarkably, was sucking her thumb and showed every intention of falling asleep. That was probably just as well, since she'd be unlikely to vomit all over Gurdip's cab. "Will the young lady be all right?" Gurdip asked. The young man took this as an invitation to gently shake the girl, who seemed intent on ignoring him. "You going to be okay, Ems? Not going to spew your load, are you?" The girl moaned softly and said something incoherent. "We are going home, Ems. Won't be long now." Ems shook her head. "I want to go home. Gurdip decided to take Millbank and the Embankment route to Chelsea. It was almost 4 a.m. and the A3212 should be pretty quiet now. Almost every vehicle Gurdip passed was another taxi or private hire vehicle of some sort, most of them the ubiquitous Ubers, the sleek white Toyotas that had reduced Gurdip's boss's revenue by 1/3 in the last 5 years. Now was most definitely the time to get out of the taxi driving game, thought Gurdip, who had a sudden strange urge to take the lottery ticket out of his wallet and double-check the numbers for probably the 10th time this week. "Where are we?" said the girl, forcing herself upright to look out of the window. She looked in a bad way, and Gurdip hoped her companion wasn't planning to take advantage of her. The body language did not suggest a close connection existed between the two. "Approaching Battersea Bridge," said Gurdip, trying to be helpful. "Damien, where are we going?" "Back to mine, remember? It's closer, innit?" said the young man, and now Gurdip knew something was wrong. The girl adjusted her garments, pulling her tiny jacket up around her shoulders. "I can turn up the heating a bit if you're cold," he offered. "Yeah, thanks, mate. Would you?" said the young man, who put his arm around the girl's shoulders. She nestled in against his chest, more Gurdip suspected for comfort than emotional support. "I want to go to Finsbury Park," the girl murmured. Gurdip turned in his seat. Since they'd stopped at some lights, the boy shook his head. "Ems, we're nearly home." 10 minutes later, they were indeed parked up in the wide arcing courtyard in front of the Chelsea Harbour complex. A curving wall of glass-fronted flats shimmered overhead as the young man handed Gurdip 2 folded 20s to pay for the 30 quid fare. Gurdip reached into his money belt for some change, but the young man waved a dismissive hand whilst trying to manoeuvre the girl out of the back seat. "Thank you, that's very generous," Gurdip replied, wondering if he should get out to help. The girl's eyes were drooping, but as soon as she felt the chill air on the side of her face, she came to and looked at her surroundings confused. "This isn't home. Where am I?" The young man looked frustrated. "We said you'd come to mine, don't you remember?" The girl frowned and dropped abruptly, slipping through the young man's arms and back onto the back seat of the taxi, knocking her head off the doorframe in so doing. She rubbed her head and moaned. "Finsbury Park, driver, please." Gurdip felt his heart rate rising, something he always had to be careful about. He tried to breathe deeply, like Dr. Patel had told him to do, in through the mouth, out through the nose. "Don't be daft, Ems. We're here now," the young man cajoled, an edge to his voice that Gurdip didn't like. "Perhaps you should just go home," Gurdip said tentatively. The young man turned to him, incredulous. "Are you kidding? Have you seen the state of her?" Gurdip shrugged. The girl curled up on the back seat and drew in her legs. "I think she doesn't want to be with you. I won't charge her anything more." "Fuck that," said the young man, pulling out another £20 note from a wad in his inside pocket and throwing it into the back seat. He began to stride away towards the flats. Good riddance, thought Gurdip, getting out of the cab to shut the rear door. "She's going to puke in your cab, you know," was the young man's parting shot as he vanished into his building. Gurdip ensured the girl's legs were safely inside, then slammed the door. He was glad to note that the girl's eyes opened, and she seemed a little more alert as he got back behind the wheel. "Finsbury Park, did you say?" She nodded. "Near Arsenal. You mind if I sleep?" "Not a problem, miss," he said. "I'll wake you up when we're nearly there." There were scratches on the side of her neck. Gurdip hadn't noticed them earlier. He wondered what misadventure she got herself into. Some people shouldn't ever drink, he thought. On the journey back, Gurdip reached into the glove compartment for a jazz CD. For a lot of his passengers, Coltrane, Dolphy and Coleman were just too way out. Their ears were not attuned to the subtleties of hard bop, and complaints would follow. He usually got away with Miles Davis, and now he actually felt in a mood for A Silent Way, which should be soft enough to let the girl in the back seat sleep as he weaved his way back towards North London. He heard soft snoring from the back seat as he took the A3220 towards Shepherd's Bush and the West Way. It didn't really matter if the route was slightly longer. The 20 quid the young man had disrespectfully thrown at him wouldn't cover it anyway. It didn't matter. Gurdip would shortly receive £6.8 million for his lottery win. No form of extravagance mattered now. By the time the album was nearing the end of the last of the 2 immense sidelong tracks, Davis's extended notes floating across the dark, rippling tide of Zawinul's keyboards, the girl in the back seat was moaning softly and rocking side to side. Gurdip reached the Seven Sisters Road and turned up towards Finsbury Park as the girl forced herself awake, with that strange homing instinct the very drunk seemed to possess. "We're nearly there," said Gurdip. "What's the address?" The girl frowned. "My sister's place. I've got it on a piece of paper." She began to search through her various pockets and handbags, seemingly without much success. Gurdip had to swerve slightly as someone in a parked car opened their passenger door without looking. Gurdip hit the horn rather too late, then heard a gagging sound from the back seat. The girl was leaning over towards the floor, her hair covering her face, but clearly she was trying to conceal the fact that she was being sick. The stench of the alcohol and stomach acid began to waft into the driver's compartment. Gurdip pulled over, feeling a rising anger that he knew he ought to quash. "I should charge you for that," he muttered, although the girl was clearly incapable of anything but her convulsive, gasping attempts to rid herself of the poison in her stomach. There was a standard £20 charge for clean-up situations like this. Most people, hugely embarrassed, paid it. Gurdip had a kit in the back for dealing with such situations: disinfectant, gloves, and a clothes peg for his nose. "Where do you live?" he insisted as the girl pulled herself upright, eyes watering, wiping her mouth. "I'm so sorry, mister. I'll pay extra. I'm at my sister's place. It's written on some paper." Once more the girl began to forage amongst her possessions. Gurdip realised he would have to help her. He got out and opened her door, somewhat relieved to see that her stomach contents appeared to be mostly alcohol. It was worse than he'd eaten, so much worse. He gently took the handbag from her and looked through it. Tissues, business cards, no sign of any address. He checked all the hidden pockets, just as he'd done with his wife when she was unwell and asking for something, usually lip balm or a compact. Right up to the end, Rewa had been concerned about her looks. "There's nothing here," said Gurdip, beginning to lose his patience. What on earth would he do if the girl couldn't remember where she was staying? "Can you call your sister?" The girl's face brightened like this was an idea of unrivaled genius. She jabbed at her phone, which wouldn't turn on. She cursed. "No power?" asked Gurdip unnecessarily, taking the device from her and confirming his suspicions. He knew what he was supposed to do in this situation, but it wasn't how he'd envisaged the night ending. He'd hoped this girl would wake up in her own bed, regretful, ashamed, but safe. Now she'd come to in a police cell, alarmed and alone. So be it. "I have to take you somewhere, dear. Can you remember what it looks like?" The girl racked her addled brains. Nothing useful came, apparently. She shook her head. Gurdip sighed. "I know where to take you." "Take me home," the girl murmured softly, beginning to fall asleep again. Gurdip started the engine. 5 minutes later, he dropped her off at Islington Police Station, and reception staff had helped her into the lobby to try and find some alternative to her spending what was left of the night in the cells. As Gurdip drove away, he hoped they'd charge her phone for her and maybe get her to call her sister. It wasn't his problem anymore. He had a cab to clean and it was nearly 5 a.m. At almost 5:30, Gurdip managed to tumble into bed. In the small one-bed apartment he'd moved to after Rewa died. He wasn't working in the hardware store tomorrow, so he could sleep until 11. Almost 6 hours, that would do. When he awoke, he might find the cash had cleared. He'd check his bank account first thing. Amazingly, as Gurdip sat eating his dosa the following morning, scooping up the bindi and hot sauce, refreshing the screen on his laptop, he actually saw the money arrive in his online banking portal. Suddenly, what had read £326.11 turned into £6,814,891.11. Just like that. No sirens, no bells. It made him gasp, then laugh, then cover his mouth, as if someone might be watching. He shut the laptop down and had two thoughts. Firstly, that he needed to visit an ATM and see the figure confirmed there. Secondly, that he needed to preserve that all-important lottery ticket. It was an artifact of great significance, and Gurdip was an inveterate hoarder of souvenirs. He opened his wallet and extracted the pink ticket. It had been folded into quarters, and when he opened it, he remembered circling each number as it had been shouted out on television. His biro had run out of ink midway, and the final two numbers were circled in pencil. As Gurdip was about to insert the ticket into a heavy book to flatten it, he noticed something written on the reverse, also in pencil. "You won't have time to spend it." What? That was odd. The handwriting was his, and yet he had no memory of writing it. And why such a strangely discouraging message? Gurdip did have a vague sense that something wasn't quite right, an edge of panic and urgency, but nothing came to mind that would clarify this weird warning, assuming that's what it was. It was almost noon. Gurdip's next shift in the cab was supposed to start at 1 p.m. That said, nobody but him would observe what time he clocked in, unless that stupid app they were supposed to use knew when they were supposed to start picking up fares. It didn't matter. He had time to visit his bank, or at least get to the ATM by the supermarket. He had time to make a surprise payment to his daughter's account. She always seemed to be short of cash. Or Gurdip could give some money to the charitable society he sometimes helped out, usually with free rides in his cab or deliveries. Now he could make a real difference. If he had more time, and he'd thought of it, he'd have stormed into the office and handed in his notice. Not because he needed to, given what was soon about to happen, but just for the fun of it. Maybe wearing a brand new tailored suit, like a true high roller. He expected it would feel wonderful, but also seemed like a very self-indulgent thing to do. Gurdip dressed quickly, throwing on some paint-splattered jeans and fixing up the hair that, uncut for 29 years, now reached the middle of his back. He put on one of the many shirts he owned that didn't need ironed, tucking it in over his round belly. Gurdip pushed the wallet deep into the pocket of a sports jacket and left the house, with a head humming with new possibilities that his life held, but also with a bass note of fear. The words of his strange note to self remained at the back of his mind as he walked the sunlit streets to the Tesco near the underground station. The usual homeless man was there, sitting amongst his belongings beside the ATM, his thin, raddled face and missing teeth a testament to years of self-abuse and deprivation. "You all right?" the homeless man said, squinting up at the sunlight. He had a pronounced Glasgow accent and seemed in relatively good spirits. "Fine, thank you," said Gurdip, typing his PIN number in and taking special care to cover his typing hand with the other so it couldn't be observed. A moment later, and there on screen was the immense, unbelievable figure. Immediately, Gurdip wished he'd opted for a printout instead. What if the person behind him saw? He turned his head. No one was there. Good. How much could he withdraw? In theory, the limit was 500. Surely he couldn't. Before he quite realised what he'd done, Gurdip hit the button alongside other sum and typed in a 5 and 2 zeros, then hit enter. Surely it wouldn't just allow... A lot of mechanical whirring emerged from the guts of the ATM, and Gurdip began to feel a flush of embarrassment. Again, what if someone put two and two together? Wembley wasn't exactly the safest environment in which to carry around £500 in cash. What an idiot. The whirring just went on and on. Then there was a click and the cash slot opened to reveal a wad of notes, all newly minted it seemed. Gurdip quickly stuffed the wad into his pocket. He'd count it in private. He was about to walk away when he remembered the homeless man. Quickly peeling off 2 notes, he handed them to the ruined figure by the ATM, who gawped at the gift disbelievingly. So surprised was he that he entirely forgot to thank Gurdip until he was walking away. "Ya wee beauty," said the Glaswegian. "Thanks, man." I could have given him more, thought Gurdip. I could have handed him the whole wad and it would have meant nothing. What an incredibly strange situation. Gurdip was about to step out onto a zebra crossing when a lycra-clad cyclist whooshed past, narrowly missing his foot. Normally this would have enraged him. The cyclist had clearly no intention of stopping. Today it meant nothing. Gurdip walked out onto the black and white stripes, wondering what on earth he should spend his newfound riches on. He hadn't even sat down and made a list yet. First things first, though. The society, and then the bank. Work would wait. It was such a lovely day, Gurdip decided to walk. The society's admin office was in neighbouring Neasden, and he could certainly do with the exercise. Perhaps he could even allow himself a brief... "Only asking you to be a little more careful with your money, that's all." But she'd hung up on him. Her own father. Layla needed to learn to become a responsible adult. It was her who'd insisted on going away for university. She could easily have stayed at home with Gurdip. He didn't absolutely have to sell the house. She made him so angry sometimes. Gurdip felt his heart begin to beat dangerously fast. He had to slow it down. He pulled open the window and let the cool breeze blow across his face, taking deep breaths of the late spring air. His head was throbbing with something left unfinished, something fantastical and strange. The notion that he had been through all this many, many times before. And that was chapter 2 of Stutter. Stranger and Stranger. It's actually, part of that is based on experience. I once had to rescue a very drunk girl who was in a terrible state, and it was like 4 in the morning and she was just, I don't know, no one else was going to help her, so I had to somehow get her home. Anyway, yeah, fun story to write and a fun character to spend time with. And I've noticed a couple of errors and typos in that, so I better fix it before I send it out to any more agents. But anyway, that was chapter 2 of Stutter. I may read you the 3rd. We'll see. Thanks for listening. Let me know what you thought. Hit the subscribe button if you're not a subscriber. Hit the like button. Do all that stuff. Possibly even share it with a friend. Especially if that friend is an agent. I mean, it's unlikely, but you never know. And I will see you again very soon. Thank you. Bye.